Good afternoon, everyone, or perhaps good morning or good evening, depending on where you are. My name is Dion Alamon, and I'm a professor in the Department of Mechanical and Industrial Engineering at the University of Toronto. Welcome to the second session of the Women in AI Speaker Series, a collaboration between the Schwartz Reisman Institute and Deloitte. The purpose of this series is to convene leading female researchers to share knowledge and mentorship opportunities for women across the technology sector, with a particular focus on artificial intelligence. Participants will explore the development of new technologies and approaches and insights into cutting-edge research from perspectives of our esteemed guest speakers. To begin today, we want to take a moment to acknowledge the land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, Toronto has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit. These and other Indigenous peoples across Turtle Island developed complex and effective governance systems based on respect for all life and the intelligence of the natural world. Today, this land is still home to many Indigenous people who are working to reclaim their rights to self-determination and self-governance, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to live and work on this land. Although we may all be joining from different places today, we encourage you to reflect on the history and relations of the land that you live and work on. Before we begin today's talk, I'd like to introduce our collaborator in this series, Aisha Green. Aisha is a senior manager at Deloitte's AI Institute focused on AI literacy and adoption. She is passionate about fostering partnerships which advance research and innovation initiatives and has worked closely with early-stage entrepreneurs to commercialize medical devices, therapeutics, and information technology applications. Welcome, Aisha.
Thank you, Dion, for that warm introduction. And good morning, good evening from wherever you're joining us here today for this session. For this second session of the Women in AI Speaker Series, we want to explore the different facets of how AI is being deployed. Earlier this year, with several collaborators, including SRI, we developed a white paper which explored the impact of AI for social good, from managing health system trends, wildlife mitigation patterns, to economic discovery and recovery. I'm happy to share this white paper here with you today, and we will be posting that link within the chat. From our esteemed speaker today, we will hear how AI is transforming the way we live and the decisions we make. We'll also hear what it means to be a woman within this space and how our speaker has navigated her career path to ensure that her work has a broader impact on the world in which we live. Our hope is that the conversations you hear and the networks you begin to foster through this series will fuel change that is vital for this sector for both women and allies. With that, I hand it back over to you, Dion, to introduce our esteemed speaker for today's lecture.
Thank you, Aisha. A few quick notes before we begin. This session is being recorded. Our guests will speak for about 45 minutes and will take questions after the talk. During the Q&A, we encourage all participants to use the raised hand function in Zoom to ask a question. To facilitate the discussion, we invite you to please update your display name with your first and last name. And now to the introduction of our speaker. Professor Joanna Batstone, PhD and Doctor of Engineering, is a leading global expert on AI, data analytics, and technology. She has more than 20 years in top executive roles in the USA, Europe, and Australia, helping universities, companies, and governments use leading technology to meet their goals. Joanna is the inaugural director of Monash Data Futures Institute at Monash University, supporting government, companies, and organizations in using AI, data science, and analytics to develop governance and policy for social good. She is building a global reputation for the Institute's groundbreaking work, along with the digital ecosystem to foster collaborative research and build industry engagement. Responsible for data science and AI across the university, she is passionate about the benefits of AI driving major change for social good. Prior to this, Joanna was Vice President Innovation, IBM Corporate Strategy based in New York. She held a range of technical and business leadership roles in IBM's research and development laboratories, including work with IBM Watson Data and AI. Through her work in AI, Joanna is leading the way when it comes to the future of data governance, and it's our pleasure to have her with us today. Joanna, the floor, as it were, is yours.
Thank you so much, and it's a pleasure to be here. Many thanks to the University of Toronto, the Schwartz Reisman Institute, and Deloitte for hosting this series of speaker events. I'm going to share a story of my own journey, both with examples from my experience at IBM, as well as my current experience at Monash University. And I thought I would start by reflecting on why are we here and why are we having these discussions around artificial intelligence? And we often hear people refer to artificial intelligence as the fourth industrial revolution, rapidly transforming industries. The reality is artificial intelligence has been with us for a long time. And so the question for all of us now is, how do we take advantage of the opportunities that are presented to us now and use them to drive competitiveness, economic growth, development, opportunity in all the countries that are represented by those of you who are joining us today? And so part of our conversation and this series of lectures is around what does it mean to develop AI solutions for the future? And what are the components that need to come into those solutions that enable us to build in diversity of thought, diversity of experience, diversity of the client set? And one of the things that I've learned over the years is that in order to be successful, we have to have strong buy-in from not just our clients, but the general public as well. Otherwise, we end up in seemingly endless debates around the pros and cons of good AI, bad AI. Is it for social good? Is it for nefarious purposes? And so I think it's always important to step back and reflect on what are we trying to accomplish now compared to where we started in the journey with AI. And starting in the journey of AI, many people would point back to the 1956 Dartmouth Conference as the beginnings of AI. In reality, many people would in fact say it started much earlier than that, during the Second World War and developments of Turing machines. But this particular conference was pretty interesting because it was a group of 10 men who thought that if they worked on a number of different technology problems, including analysis of neural nets, then within a 2-month period, they would be able to, in essence, build a system and series of machines that were, in essence, equivalent to the human capabilities of the way that we think, the way that we act, the way that we reason, use logic, and develop technologies that, in essence, over a course of a couple of months, would have solved many of the challenges that 50 years later, more than 50 years later, we're still looking at how do we implement many of the characteristics. So it's a pretty interesting conference that brought together researchers from a number of different disciplines. You'll recognize Marvin Minsky up there. But it was a pretty bold statement to think that within 2 months, we would be able to create and solve many of the problems that we're still looking at from an AI perspective today. And of course, during the time period since, we've gone through what people will often call the winter of AI and various different challenges in terms of, is the technology good enough to be able to drive impact, not just from an academic pursuit perspective, but drive impact from a technology perspective. And so that brings us then to a discussion around where do we think we are from an adoption perspective with AI today? And what does tomorrow look like? And this is often referred to, tomorrow is often referred to as general intelligence, artificial general intelligence, with robotics, enabling computers to surpass the abilities of humans. The reality is we're probably somewhere in the middle of we've moved beyond the foundations of AI and ML that started in the 50s and 60s. We've seen transformation of the kinds of technologies that are available to us. The 3 gentlemen on the left there, Alan Turing, Marvin Minsky, and Jeff Hinton from Toronto, have had significant impact on the way that we think about AI today. Today, though, what we're seeing is AI showing up in all different types of areas of our lives. And we're seeing tremendous amount of discussion of AI in both scientific literature and the popular press. And so here are a few examples of where we're seeing AI today. And some of these prompt us to have a conversation around how do we feel about the impact of AI? So, for example, AI and neural implants are delivering an artificial nervous system. This raises a number of different questions around the interface between the human body and the machine, and both the opportunities of how to support people from enabling capabilities, but also raises questions around ethically, how do we think about the adoption of new technology as it relates to us as individuals? One of the very highly charged discussions over the last few years has been around, again, opportunities and risks of using AI facial recognition technology. And this is a very heated debate and discussion, as many of you know. On one hand, we really appreciate the value of facial recognition when it makes life seemingly easier for us, when we pick up our phone and our phone uses our facial recognition to be able to unlock our phone, or we rapidly speed through the immigration gates at the airport because our face is recognized, matched against the database of our passport photographs. But at the same time, there are nefarious uses of facial recognition technology that make us very, very uncomfortable and that start to invade the way we think about human rights, data privacy, and the respect for the individual. And governments around the world are tackling how to handle the appropriate and sometimes inappropriate use of new technology. And facial recognition is one of those that has a very heated debate within the media and from a personal data privacy perspective. And so for all of us, it then raises the question, what are our responsibilities as leaders in this discussion of where is AI taking us? And one of the reasons I was very happy to participate in this lecture series is because if you think back to that Dartmouth conference, 10 men talking about where we can develop AI solutions for the future, when we look at where we are today with the diversity of the population that is both building and using AI solutions, we still have a long way to go from a diversity perspective. And in fact, many of us would challenge that we have a diversity issue still within the workforce with respect to artificial intelligence. And so I share here some examples of statistics that have been published recently. And again, particular focus on Australia, where I currently live and work. But in Australia, we're really low on the ranking scales of the percentage of women in the workforce. And in fact, if anything, we're going backwards. And particularly as we think about the impact of the last couple of years of the pandemic, the reports suggest that it's even worse and we're taking a bigger step back, in part because of the perhaps disproportionate impact of the impact of COVID on the workforce, particularly women, and that in essence, potentially even the global gender gap has increased and the gender pay gap has increased related to where we were even before the pandemic. So it's pretty clear that we have to focus on how do we encourage women to get involved in developing, using, building new solutions for the future. And that includes the data side, and in addition to the algorithm side, it includes the whole workflow of understanding a problem statement that has a societal impact and building and delivering a solution that would enable us to be able to respond. So bringing together, excuse me, bringing together the community here of women and our collaborators to be able to address some of the challenges in the workforce is really, really important. And the whole notion of supporting each other and mentoring each other is something that I've been very focused on over the last few years. But I want to use some examples from my own journey as a woman in STEM and a woman in industry. And as you've heard, I spent many years in IBM. And my journey, though, did not start with artificial intelligence. It really started with a role of integrating data from lab instruments, understanding how to process data, understanding how to drive insights from data. And over a number of different projects and experiments over the years at IBM, I arrived back in the IBM research labs in the mid-2000s when we were starting to build what became known as the IBM Watson computer or the IBM Jeopardy computer. But in fact, when you think about Watson, it in fact was a journey that brought a lot of computer science capabilities and techniques into ultimately what became a game show system. But it had a heritage of many years worth of investments in not just game playing, but investments in machine learning, natural language processing, but particularly unstructured information management. And it came after investments that we had seen around playing chess, playing backgammon, that enabled highly special purpose machines to be able to produce one particular set of results extremely well. So the Deep Blue chess playing computer was extremely good at playing chess. The difference as we started to embark on a journey to IBM Watson was we needed to be able to open up the opportunities for AI systems beyond single purpose game playing. And so Jeopardy became a challenge for us. For those of you who are not in North America and are unaware of the game of Jeopardy, it's a question and answer style game where posed with an answer, you have to comprise a question, or to answer the question as if you were comprising an answer. So it's a complex linguistic challenge and analysis. But for me, within IBM, at this point, I was now an executive in IBM, and I had a team of researchers who were machine learning experts. And under the leadership of the vice president at the time, Charles Lickle, we assembled a team to put together the expertise that was needed to build out a pretty complex Jeopardy system, and then to play the game live on TV with Ken and Brad. And so some pretty bold decisions were made along the way of ring fencing the team under the leadership of David Ferrucci to be able to build out the capabilities that were needed for this particular Jeopardy system. And, and for me, this was really one of the areas where as a manager, as an executive, we were making decisions around the teams that we needed and the individuals in the teams that we needed to be successful. And so we moved our machine learning people into this special group within IBM and empowered them to build out the capabilities. And for those of you who perhaps have seen or read about the story of IBM Watson, one of the things that's often perhaps misunderstood is that there were in essence several AI systems that were built into this solution, including the betting strategy system of how to find the daily doubles, how to place a bet, how much money was left on the board, and the strategy around game playing, as well as all of the technology associated with question and answering. So 2011, that's a long time ago. What comes next? Well, when you take a technology like this that's fundamentally built from the research labs, then the question becomes, how do you operationalize and drive a business around it? And there were many business opportunities that came out from these early investments. And one of the ones that I was involved in was a focus around how do we take this style of technology and turn it into a set of capabilities that could be used in industries, and in particular could be used within the domain of health sciences. And so the notion of being able to leverage this question and answering technology now to be able to read millions and millions of documents, millions and millions of medical articles that have been published, peer-reviewed articles, the ability to interpret physician-generated information in an electronic medical record, this was viewed as a tremendous opportunity. And just one of the areas where IBM moved to create new opportunities based on the technology coming out of the research labs. So for me, this then took me into the opportunity of being able to run and lead IBM's research labs in Australia And it took me on an international assignment from New York into Australia. And the opportunity within the research labs was to think about how do we analyze disparate sets of data and start to bring together very transdisciplinary teams of people, but also transdisciplinary data sets with a view of trying to improve the individual health opportunities and outlooks for individuals, as well as being able to understand opportunities for improving disease outcomes and looking at ways that we can use AI techniques in the world of drug discovery for the future. So this was a very exciting time period, within IBM research, and tremendous amount of publications that came out of this particular phase of work. Excuse me for my cough. Now, within the field of clinical treatment, one of the early applications that we spent a lot of time working on within the labs was around using machine learning and deep learning techniques in particular to look at a range of different medical imaging applications. And in order to be able to demonstrate capability, we engaged in a lot of the competitions that I'm sure many of you have participated in with ImageClef and LifeClef, and really trying to understand and build out the set of capabilities and annotations, segmentations, fusion of data sets and methods to be able to look at different applications of particularly deep learning techniques as it related to retinal imaging, breast MRI, cardiac MRI. And this was a big body of work in the context of understanding the elements of the technologies that would be needed to be successful in this space. And what that meant really was we were thinking through not just building technology in the lab, but how do we build out the set of capabilities, clinical decision support tools, for example, that enable us to be able to take research from the labs into the world and enable support for practitioners to be able to take advantage of the opportunities and capabilities that were starting to be enabled. And one of the areas of focus was around retinal imaging. And the focus was not just about imaging, but it's really important to be able to put together these multimodal data sets, to be able to combine analyzing an image, whatever type of image it is, but also then bringing in the clinical data, being able to think through prediction, detection, and treatment associated with a particular type of disease. So we actually started this work thinking about diabetic retinopathy as an area of focus, but also included a lot of the work to think about other types of eye disease, including glaucoma, but also a view that says, if the view into the individual's health is through the eye, what other kinds of prediction of disease can be enabled as we understand how to analyze better the types of images that we can get through a variety of different eye treatment opportunities. And so this led us to a journey of AI for the eye to be able to look at other opportunities of being able to drive real measurements of disease progression through analysis and treatment. And this within Australia has led into a number of different programs now, including in partnership with Monash University and the Centre for Eye Research Australia, around putting some of this technology now into practice in the context of opportunities to support clinicians and to drive an improvement in the overall eye health and public health of the nation. Another focus of ours in the research labs in Australia, and again, it continues now that I'm at Monash, was the opportunities to use image analytics in the treatment of melanoma, or at least in the identification and detection of melanoma, which many of you may know is the fourth most common cancer within Australian men and women. And it often goes undetected. And so again, a big program of work here to understand, can we improve the detection capabilities to support the dermatologists in the clinics to be able to do early identification? Can we in fact improve the types of scanning devices, both on mobile applications as well as full body scanners, to be able to look at building out better detection capabilities that will then enable us to do early detection of melanoma and other skin cancers, and then look at ways to improve disease outcome in the future with various immunology derived treatments. And one of the things that we learned through this work is it's actually really important, back to my opening remarks, to have societal buy-in, to have people adopting and understanding the opportunities around deploying some of these new technologies from a societal context. And so one of the really inspiring and motivating phases of this work around melanoma was a piece of work that we did down at Bondi Beach in Australia. Many of you may have heard of Bondi. It's one of the most famous beaches in the world, famous beach in Australia. And we ran a program one weekend in March 2017 to bring technology to the people. In essence, a sort of a citizen science experiment. But what we did was we assembled in the Surf Lifesaving Club at Bondi Beach a series of demonstrations and the opportunity for free skin checks. And the public opted into this program with us and enabled us to build out a much bigger data set of skin images that enabled us to continue to improve and train the capabilities of the work that we had underway within the research labs. And it got a tremendous amount of press and enabled us to demonstrate how we can use these different types of algorithmic advances with a significant data set of images in partnership, not just from this group and the public that showed up to participate with us, but also in partnerships with significant local partners, including MolMap New Zealand and Australia, who were fundamental in helping us to annotate and build the database of skin cancer images to be able to enable us to go through these early melanoma detection experiments. So it was a big piece of work, but it was really interesting to see how important it is to get the public excited about the opportunities of what we can enable, particularly as it relates to improving the outcomes for disease progression. And around something as emotive as melanoma in Australia, this was a very exciting opportunity to bring the researchers in the lab to understand the impact that their technology could have in the marketplace, and to be able to think about how that's really changing the outlook and the prospects of really leveraging here AI for social good. Now, one of the things that I've learned through all of this journey, certainly through IBM, was as I started life as a very young and immature and naive researcher, as you grow in your career, you realize that you have to be willing to stand up and be the spokesperson for the work that you and your team are doing. And for me, one of the things that really started pushing me outside of my comfort zone was when I was being asked to stand up on literally the big stage and lead presentations about the work that we had going on within the research labs and the journey of how to bring an idea from a researcher into something that a major technology corporation is looking at taking to market. And for those of you who haven't had the opportunity to stand up on the big stage and present your work, it is a journey, and it's something that we can all learn, and it's certainly something that I would never have experienced, never have suspected that I would have been doing when I first joined IBM Research as a physicist. So those are some examples of my recent work within IBM. But as you heard from my introduction, about 2 years ago, I moved to Monash University to lead a new institute at Monash with a focus on artificial intelligence and data science. And many people have asked me about that move and that journey. And fundamentally, it comes down to my experiences in the research labs at IBM around how do we connect industry and academia in a much more meaningful way. And so that took me on a journey to academia. Whilst I was working in the research labs in Australia, I had built a lot of relationships and collaborations with Australian universities, particularly in the state of Victoria and in Melbourne. And I had started to see both some of the opportunities and the challenges as we think about how academics and industry partners work together and the timescale for impact. And so I considered moving to academia when this fantastic role at the Monash Data Futures Institute opened up. And little did I know when I chose to take on this new role that I would be switching jobs in the middle of a pandemic, and started my new role in August 2020. And this picture that you see on the screen here is actually the Green Chemical Futures building. The sculpture on the left is a reimagined carbon-60 buckyball. And the Green Chemical Futures building is actually the home for the Monash Data Futures Institute. And so our offices are actually in this building. Now, within the Data Futures Institute, one of the things that was particularly exciting for me was it was a way to bring together and integrate the interests in data science and AI across the entire university. And Monash is a big university. We're not just in Australia. We have campuses around the world, including in China, in Indonesia, Malaysia, Italy, and a partnership in India. And so we're a pretty big international university. And one of the ways that we're really looking at building out the Data Futures Institute is in really elevating that conversation around AI and data science and bringing new collaborators together. Now, I'm also a professor in the Faculty of IT, and the Faculty of IT also has a really large program of work around data science and AI with the Department of Data Science and AI. And that's where a lot of the development and expertise around vision and language, optimization, Bayesian networks, the technology aspects of artificial intelligence is within the Faculty of IT. And then we bring together the remainder of the different faculties, and we have 10. And so we're really focused here on integrating a conversation around researchers that come into the conversation with a different perspective. One of the things that was really clear to me in industry is really good at building teams of people, bringing teams together with diverse backgrounds and experiences and interests, integrating across the HAS disciplines, the STEM disciplines. Within the university segment, it's a mass generalization, we tend to sit within the faculty in which we are hired. And so the opportunity for us within the Institute is to bring those cross-disciplinary conversations together and to look at opportunities to do something different as we bring those diverse capabilities together. And so that's what we've been doing within the Data Futures Institute. And so I want to give you some examples of what we've been learning along the way and as part of that journey. With any new mission, you have to frame and scope where you're going to get started. And we have 3 dominant areas of investment. This is not exclusively where we focus, but we've framed the agenda for the Institute broadly around these 3 big topic areas. In essence, AI and data science as it relates to health sciences to enable us to build out thriving communities. AI and data science as it relates to impacts of climate change and sustainable development. And then the broader conversation around governance and policy and ethics frameworks, and particularly over the last couple of years, the really challenging things that we're seeing around the world with respect to geopolitical security, or in fact, insecurity. And these three areas frame the way we think about investments in AI across Monash, but also frame the way that we look at partnerships, both internationally and domestically, with industry, with government, with NGOs, and with international university partners. And one of the things that we realized when we first started this work within the Institute is, again, back to the public. We really need to have a sense of how does society feel about artificial intelligence, and what permission will we have as we think about new opportunities. And so one of the first pieces of work that we kicked off within the Institute was to do a survey within Australia of really understanding public attitudes, and was a really interesting survey, and we can make the report available for all of you to download and read. But one of the things that we really realized coming out of this survey was actually a tremendous amount of both optimism, but also concern, and also a tremendous amount of trust from the public as it relates to Australian national institutions such as the National Scientific Labs, Government Labs, CSIRO, Data 61 as our national investments in government investment of research, and the role that government needs to play in laying out ethical guidelines, frameworks for ethical development of technology. And so we wanted to understand the end user's perspective. What do people understand AI means from a society perspective? Do people even understand what AI is? And how does that then help inform us on our work going forward within the Institute? So really interesting findings coming out of this, and certainly would encourage you to take a look and read on and understand from an Australian perspective what we were hearing as we launched the Institute. As we've extended our work, one of the things that we've been really focused on is this notion of impact in society. And one of the conversations that we've been exploring alongside a key partner of ours, the Paul Ramsay Foundation, is a conversation around disadvantage. And we hear a lot in the media about disadvantage. But the conversation around disadvantage changes over time. It changes with the political agenda. It changes if there's an election cycle coming up. And the narrative around disadvantage gets influenced by the media and political discourse and conversation of the day. But the program of work that we've been doing with the Paul Ramsay Foundation is really to understand how that narrative of disadvantage changes. How does it change over time? What are some of the key decision points or the key inflection points around how that conversation is changing? And how does that then enable us to be more effective as advocates in the conversation around policy with government to be able to support disadvantaged and minority groups that are sometimes hidden in the conversation? So what this meant from a project perspective was, this is more than a natural language experiment. It was a lot of analysis of Australian media articles, Australian government opinion pieces, policy documents that we had to both annotate manually and then programmatically and then automate to be able to develop some points of view around the conversations around a number of different diverse minority groups, including children, First Nations people, the elderly, the impacts of COVID on those groups. And interestingly, how those conversations change, particularly as we've been through a couple of election cycles recently in Australia. The Paul Ramsay Foundation's facility is in Darlinghurst in Sydney. That's the picture on the bottom left there of their building. And we've now been able to put up some big screen visualization displays within the Darlinghurst building to encourage the public, the visitors, to come and explore those changing narratives of disadvantage within some really new and interesting visualization storytelling techniques, and to engage the public in helping to explore what that conversation around disadvantage means for the future. We heard during the introductions around the need to think about the ecosystem, biodiversity, and one of the theme areas, as I mentioned, for us is around impact of climate change and also sustainable development. And so an example of one of the projects that we have underway in the context of AI and data science for sustainable development is looking at invasive species and threatened ecosystems. So this is a pretty interesting project. The cane toad is viewed as a highly invasive species in Australia, and its field of distribution across Australia is increasing, and it's a very damaging invasive species. What we've been focused on is how do we build out AI databases or data sets that we can leverage a number of different AI techniques, vision, machine learning, to be able to understand and map out invasive species trajectories, risks, opportunities. And again, this brings in this notion of a citizen science engagement to help leverage and identify species in the wild across a large nation like Australia. And so there are a number of different traditional data repositories we've been bringing in from Australian museum collections. We've also been bringing in citizen science data repositories. I particularly like Frog ID. This is a mobile application where you can go out and record frog sounds in the park, near the ponds, in the lakes, and upload them into a database and help identify frogs within the ecosystem. That helps us build out these maps to be able to identify where we are today, but also to be able to model and predict where we will end up with some of these ecosystems as we start to change the models with different approaches of climate impact data. It's hard to have lived in certainly Victoria and Melbourne for the last 2 years without having had some impact of the pandemic hit us. And one of the things that we kicked off in 2020 was a piece of work that we called the Melbourne Experiment, which was around trying to understand the experiences of life before, during, and now hopefully after the pandemic on many aspects of life and health and living. And one of the projects that we explored in partnership with the pharmaceutical sciences team, the Faculty of IT, and the Institute was looking at, do people get their prescriptions fulfilled during a pandemic when they're locked down? And do some prescriptions, do people seek to fulfill prescriptions that are potentially indicative of disease conditions, particularly mental health or physical health, more or less when you're in a very constrained environment where you can only go outside of your neighborhood or within a 5-kilometer radius? Within Australia, we have what's called the Pharmaceutical Benefits Scheme, which enables records of all prescription dispensing tied to your Medicare card to be able for the Australian government's Medicare reimbursement schemes to be able to both reimburse, but also to be able to track prescription dispensing within a community. And so a big piece of data science experimentation went on here, looking particularly at a couple of key drug families, one of which was opioids. And in fact, the hypothesis was that during a pandemic, the opioid challenges around the world have been so dramatic and horrifying. The prediction was we would see an increase in opioid use as people felt really under pressure, threatened, under lockdown, suffering from a variety of different conditions, physical and mental health conditions. Would that opioid uptake, or would that opioid dispensing go up? But interestingly, what we found was it fell during COVID. And one of the ideas here as to why that may be is that a lot of initial opioid prescriptions are for people coming out of surgery and coming out of elective surgery. And during the pandemic, the number of elective surgery treatments dropped significantly. And so our hypothesis here is that the reasons we've seen opioids decline during the pandemic were because, in fact, the number of elective surgeries decreased. What we're now seeing is an uptake as we come out of the pandemic. But this set of analyses and methodologies and techniques that the team has now developed are giving us real insights into the patterns of dispensing that enable us to look at opportunities even for thinking about how you move an individual from one treatment to another, and potentially does that enable us even to look at adjacent opportunities and even drug repurposing for the future. I have a few more examples here from projects that we've kicked off recently, and again, it relates to health and life in the city. And for many of us, perhaps less so in North America, certainly when I lived in New York, I didn't ride my bicycle as much as I do here in Australia. But for many people around the world, the bicycle is an essential form of public transport. But for cities in particular, bike riding is not always safe. And as you survey the general public, one of the reasons that certainly we don't see as much bike riding here in Australian cities is this perceived lack of safety of the bicycle. And so this piece of work around bicycling has an element of both the technology side of instrumenting the bicycle, instrumenting the rider, but also the experiential side of how does a cyclist feel? What do they experience through their journey on the streets? And so this again brings in the world of language. We enable recording, video recording, language recording, as well as instrumentation of the individual, as well as instrumentation on the bicycle, combined with geospatial data to be able to measure that experience. And one of the goals here is to be able to, again, drive a policy discussion within the cities and local governments around how to not just increase the safety of cycling, but actually to improve the public health of a nation by enabling a different view of what transportation could mean in a city of the future. And so again, this is a nice example of one of our programs where we've brought together the Faculty of Engineering, the Faculty of IT, the Faculty of Medicine to put together that public health angle as well as science and technology angle together to build new partnerships and relationships and to, in essence, create new programs of research that wouldn't have happened if we had stayed within our swim lanes of sitting within an individual faculty. Again, on the health angle, but pulling together technology with health again, one of the programs of work that we have that falls under our banner of climate change, but also thriving communities, is around understanding the impact of bushfire smoke on global health. And clearly, this is a problem not just here in Australia, but it's a global problem. But interestingly, one of the challenges here is understanding the concentrations of bushfire smoke around the world is a non-trivial exercise. And being able to understand the particulate size of the smoke particles in the air in different nations around the world is also very challenging. And so one of the focus areas of this piece of work is in fact to build out those data sets around bushfire smoke and to be able to identify harmful smoke levels, and then to be able to correlate that with the health burden within a nation or a country, as well as the health response that a country needs to be able to look at, and then putting that together with the sort of economic modeling around the opportunities for improvement in pandemic response in the context of bushfires, pandemic response in the context of has a natural disaster like a bushfire changed or adversely differentiated between advantaged and disadvantaged communities. So these programs bring together these different disciplines, all of them with a context of applying AI and data science in the context of societal impact, societal good. And obviously these are just highlights of the programs of work that we have underway, but I've included the links for all of these programs where you can read more about them on our websites. As I start to wrap up, I thought what I would do here is to share some of the pieces of work that we've been doing to build the community, to bring researchers together. And one of the things that we've kicked off, and I'd invite all of you to take a look at the seminars that we've been launching and the Monash Prato AI Summit that we held recently, is around bringing this international community of AI for social good practitioners together. And so we've run lecture series, much like this SRI Institute series with Deloitte. We've run a lecture series around different elements of the conversation of AI for social good. And we've convened a Monash AI Summit dialogue that will be running again next year in July in our Monash Prato, Italy Center. And we had a great series of speakers and participants, and we'd really encourage all of you who are in this webinar with us today to consider engaging in this broader conversation and potentially even joining us in Italy next year. And we really want to focus the conversation around bringing together the societal, humanitarian aspect, including legal and education implications as well, along with the technology discipline fields of AI. So please consider joining us next July. I've mentioned law and ethics a few times, and it's pretty important for us to engage in the conversation around ethics. And one of the ways we've been doing this is in partnership with the Faculty of Law, and they run a Change Makers Leadership Series, where for the last 3 years, we've been running a series of conversations around ethics, disinformation, societal implications of AI. And this is all through the lens of AI is a new technology that has an impact on society. And one of the things that's been pretty interesting in this conversation is the Faculty of Arts has a pretty large focus around philosophy, and a lot of faculty and researchers who are really interested in extending the conversation from a Faculty of Arts philosophy perspective into the application of AI in a particular domain. And so we've seen some nice partnerships form between the philosophy group and the medical group around, for example, how do we think about the conversation a clinician has with a patient and how and when they should be disclosing that they are using an AI-assisted diagnostic tool to help them in their treatment plan for the patient? It raises all kinds of interesting questions. And so this conversation around the impact of AI on society has to include this conversation around ethical considerations, data privacy considerations, human rights considerations. And so again, it's a pretty active conversation that we've been engaged in since we've launched the Institute. It's also important to be participating in the bigger global communities. And so we felt it pretty important to get engaged with the United Nations AI for Good program. And we've run a number of different webinars with the AI for Good team with the United Nations. We actually have another one coming up on December the 15th. But this has been a good opportunity for us to showcase again the variety of expertise and the variety of interests across the broader Monash University community around the opportunities for AI. And you can see from some of the titles here, sustainable transformation for smart cities, energy, mobility. One that I'm always really interested in is the application of AI as it relates to the creative arts. And so we've got work here with AI as it relates to music. We've got an interesting program of work at Monash through the Sensi Lab team around visual creative arts. We've really been looking at the impact of how do we look at AI as it relates to the broader brain health, healthy minds, healthy brains, healthy bodies. And so this program of work is a way for us to showcase some of the work going on at Monash, but also to engage in the broader conversation around the circular economy and sustainability. And I'm sure many of you were involved in this program of work as well with the United Nations, but it's really been a really good experience for us to look at that broader international engagement and to be able to have the conversations around the opportunities of AI for good from a societal impact. Now, I can't finish any presentation without talking about how important it is to continue to support women in AI. And so I've included here just some of the things that we've done just this year in 2022 here in Australia. Many of you might be involved in the Worldwide Women in Data Science program as well. We've been running events locally here in Australia through the Australia Data Science Network. We've participated and supported the IEEE Women in Engineering Leadership Summit that we hosted at Monash earlier this year in August. The Bionics Institute has this wonderful Graham Clark Oration Women in STEM luncheon that a number of us participated in. And so this is all about engaging in the network of women in tech and supporting the next generation of women in STEM by nominating them for programs that are enable them to both grow as individuals, but also enable them to showcase their work and potentially end up on that big stage in the future. And then one of the things that we've been very pleased to support through the Global Women in AI program and the Women in AI Awards program is, first of all, Women in AI Awards Australia and New Zealand, which we've run for the last 2 years. And the Monash Data Futures Institute has been one of the prime sponsors of that event. Next year, it's pretty exciting because this extends to be Women in AI Awards Asia Pacific. So we're extending the influence out beyond Australia and New Zealand, but to include women in AI across Asia Pacific. And of course, for us, since we are a university with a footprint in India, in Indonesia, in Malaysia, and in China, this we viewed was a great opportunity to be able to continue to celebrate and network across the community of women practitioners in AI and to be able to celebrate their accomplishments. So we're pretty excited about this. Back to how do we build those networks? We've been running a number of different events internally. We've got our PhD students coming in and telling us about what they're excited about their PhD projects. But we've got a wide range of opportunities and projects. And we've been really, really focused on trying to bring our communities together. The Monash Arts, Design and Architecture team, the Monash Business School, the School of Chemistry within the Faculty of Science, bringing the community together from which we can then invest in and build these new programs of research, some of which I showed with you earlier. And I have to sort of wrap up with where I personally started, which is over on the left there as a young woman in a physics lab. And you can see, even though this was decades ago, the PC at the time and the enormous floppy disk of the time up there on the desk next to me. And that's where my journey started into this world of AI and data science for social good. It started with data, and it started with lab data, and it's taken me on a journey. And I was very honored recently when the University of Bristol recognized me with an honorary Doctor of Engineering degree. And so it sort of feels like I've come full circle from my early days as a physicist at the University of Bristol, now to be able to celebrate the accomplishments, clearly not just me, but the accomplishments of the teams that we've built and the teams that we've been able to lead as we've put together this journey of data, analytics, insights, artificial intelligence, in the context of how do we bring all of that through a societal conversation to deliver solutions in the field that are going to have a real, tangible, long-lasting benefit for society. So thank you very much for the opportunity to share some of this work with you today. I really appreciate the opportunity, and it's a big thanks to the Schwartz Reisman Institute, the University of Toronto, and Deloitte for the opportunity to participate in this great Women in AI series. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Joanna, for such an expansive and fascinating talk. We are pleased now to move into our discussion period and welcome questions from all participants. Please use the raised hand function to let me know if you have a question, and I will call on you, and at which point I'll remind you to unmute your microphone. I will probably butcher your name in the process, and please feel free to let us all know your correct pronunciation if needed.
Maybe I can kick it off, Dion. So Joanne, thank you so much for this wonderful presentation and talk. It's impressive in terms of not only what you can share, but also your path as well. My question is really for a lot of our cohort members and that taking the step into that bigger stage. So I think a lot of our cohort are at that stage of how do you do that? How do you actually make that step as a woman into a field that from all of your pictures, we're very still male dominated, and making sure that it is impactful, it is insightful to the story that you're trying to tell?
Yes, it's a fantastic question, because certainly, when I was a young physicist, I mean, one of the reasons I put the picture of me with all of my PhD student, postdoc, lecturer cohort at the University of Bristol together is it was, as a physicist, it was a journey of not just the lone woman, but few women in the field. And how do you develop a level of confidence that you can ensure that your voice is being heard? And so for me, there were a couple of things that have really helped me over the years. One of which is always, if you're in a room with lots of different people and you don't feel your voice is being heard, particularly if you're a researcher or, often in conference rooms, perhaps not so much in Zoom these days. But one of the things that always helped me in order to be able to get my voice across when sometimes it felt like I said something, but nobody heard me, and then the man said something and everyone said, oh yeah, that's a great idea, was always to figure out, is there a way for me to pick up a pen and go to the whiteboard and start summarizing either the points I want to make in a conversation, or to summarize what I'm hearing, and in essence, bring control back to me in terms of having that conversation. Now, that's easier to do when you've got a whiteboard. But as we think about different ways of engaging in the conversation, for me, that was one of the things that I learned very early on, was that if I could take control of the pen, and I don't mean that from a secretarial perspective, I mean that take control of the dialogue and the conversation, and the pen was often a way to do that, then that was really helpful. Now, the other thing about getting up on the big stage, that was terrifying for me initially. I mean, it was really terrifying. It was butterflies in the stomach, sweaty palms, really, really terrifying. But I ended up being able to take it back to sort of getting to a comfort level that was, for me, equivalent to being a young sportswoman. As a teenager, I used to swim competitively. And so that feeling of butterflies and being nervous about the journey that you're about to embark on, for me was a bit like I'm standing on the blocks in the swimming pool, the gun goes off, you dive in the pool, and then you just have to keep going. And so being able to harness that feeling of I'm walking up onto the big stage, and it's a bit like standing on the blocks in the swimming pool. Once you get going, it will be fine. Once you get going, you'll relax and you'll get into the conversation. But developing some of those calming techniques to ground myself of it's actually going to be okay, enabled me to build up a level of confidence and experience to be able to relax enough that it was less of a terrifying experience. But as a young scientist, it was a really terrifying experience to think that I would be up there on the big stage.
Thanks, Joanna. So we have some questions from the audience now. So I'll first call on Marianne Helwergel.
Hello, I'm Marianne Helwergel. I work for IEEE. I'm their institutional historian and archivist. And I was interested in your surveys of the public. What are they most accepting about the applications of AI, and what applications are they the most reserved about?
Yes, so
thank you.
That's it. Yeah, so Marianne, I'd be happy to share the link for the bigger document as well. I would say, there was a broad conversation around not necessarily having enough knowledge and understanding of, well, what is AI and why do I as a member of the public need to care about it? So there was definitely a dialogue and thread around that. In terms of where was the most optimism, it was actually around optimism and trust that the Australian government and national labs were trusted entities, and that the public would trust that the conversation and dialogue and frameworks around ethical AI would be adopted. Where there has been risk in the conversation is around the perception of big things that have gone wrong, particularly conversations in the media around, for example, robo-debt, which was a particular challenge around automation of decisions that adversely affected people on benefit schemes. And so the perception of the negative conversations versus the perception of the opportunity for good were some of the conversations that came out of this public analysis. But for all of you, I'd be more than happy to share the document around some of these findings and perceptions from the Australian public.
Our next question is from Kieran.
So Joanna, first of all, compliments. I think last few minutes were a treat. The kind of work you have done is quite inspiring. So a lot of compliments to you on that. I've been a student of AI myself, and one thing that I've realized in my career is everything depends on data. So while there's a lot of good work that you want to do, of course, when it comes to medical, you have your devices which can give you a lot of data. If it comes to anything else, but when it comes to public health policies, when it comes to something like using a bicycle, with the example that you took up, how do you get data? Because some examples around that would help us to kind of look into public health specifically.
Yeah, so it's a really good point. And in fact, when I was still at IBM, one of the things, and I'm not sure if we've got any IBMers in the meeting today, but one of the things that we used to talk about is there is no AI without IA. For example, an information architecture. And for those of you in industry, what you'll know is that being able to embark on a successful AI project means you really need to get your data organization in place first. Otherwise, your AI project won't have the data sets that it really needs. So completely agree, Kieran. From a public health perspective, there's a few things. One of the things that we do at Monash is we are custodians of a lot of clinical registry data. And so bringing clinical registries under the umbrella and custodianship of the university has been a big focus for the School of Public Health. But that also requires that you've got some pretty clear sensitive data guidelines around those data sets and approvals and access rights for researchers to gain access to those data sets. And so one of the things that we do within the School of Public Health is to put together these clinical registry data sets. In the context of that bicycling example that I used, the people that are engaged in that particular project opt in, right? They opt in to share their data for research purposes. And so as we have a community of cyclists around the city, they are opting in to share their data. And that's an interesting question for all of us as we think about how many of us are wearing Fitbits or Apple Watches or other devices, tracking devices on us. We are opting in to share our data in the context of the general desire to be able to, by sharing our data, improve the outcomes, not just for ourselves, but for others. So it's a really interesting discussion, Kieran, around public health data. What is sensitive and private? What can be open and shared? And how do you put together the right data privacy frameworks to enable access for research purposes, but not access to the general public? And how do you protect that from a cyber perspective so that you don't end up with leakage of data out into the public that is sharing really sensitive information? So lots of challenges from a cyber perspective there, but also big opportunities to think through how do we lay out those frameworks for the future that will enable opportunities for research, but still enable protection of data sets from a human rights perspective.
I will point out, I've got an old school analog watch. Paranoia abounds. Our next question is from Ivana Vucinovic, Global AI Programs Lead at Deloitte.
Okay, very good pronunciation of my name.
Thank you.
And yes, so from Deloitte, Joanna, thank you for both extremely informative and inspiring past hour. I was very intrigued by what you shared about your experience of taking IBM Watson from a game setting to an enterprise-wide solution. And I'm wondering what would be some of the learnings that you from that journey that you think might be applicable as we take some of the other innovation, for example, in regards to the metaverse that was used in gaming before and today, and in general for entertainment purposes, but bringing it into an enterprise and solving enterprise-wide solutions with a similar tech. What would you say are some of the biggest learnings?
Yeah, so one of the ways that as IBM was launching the IBM Watson business and then the components within the IBM Watson business that included Watson Health and Watson Media and Watson Financial and other Watson components of the business is that the initial launch of the business units took a lot of researchers from the research division and moved them into development. And that was an interesting experiment. You know, it had some ups and downs. And I think one of the key learnings was not all researchers make good developers, and not all developers understand what research means. So as you think about technology transfer, it's really a conversation around how do you build the right partnerships between people who know how to build product and people who have had those original ideas that enabled us to create, in essence, the first prototype. But the first prototype isn't necessarily what will then scale to millions of users around the world. And so I think some of the key points here around tech transfer is you've got to get the right kind of people that want to go on that journey of tech transfer. And it doesn't mean it's 100% of the research team that built the prototype. And I think that translates into universities as well, as we think about universities' desire to put together accelerator programs, generator programs, startup on entrepreneur programs. The faculty members or the students who opt into those programs are those who have a natural desire to go on that entrepreneurial or business development journey, but it isn't for everyone. And I think for us, one of the key learnings was around you've got to get the right group of people to move with the technology and then move back again, potentially into research, once that technology has been productized. So I think it's really a big statement around teamwork. Assemble the right team. And that's not necessarily the team that built the first prototype, but it could be some of them.
Thank you.
Our next question is from Maya Lee, PhD student in electrical engineering from University of Toronto, investigating machine learning in healthcare.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for the introduction, for the amazing presentation. I'm passionate, other than my formal PhD education, I'm passionate about AI education for those who don't have access to proper education. We have worked before with IBM actually to deliver an artificial intelligence course to students in Sudan. It was a really successful course that 350 students benefited from. So I want to see if you at Monash or at Deloitte, if they offer such things to make sure that the new generations have access to a good quality of AI education, as well as one that takes care of the aspects of algorithmic fairness, ethics, and getting back to society.
Yes, thank you. So within Monash, we have a number of new degree programs we've launched, and a number of also new certificate programs that we've launched. I'd certainly be interested, in following up on what kind of access and programs would be of value based on what you see. But some of the things that we've launched in the last couple of years, we've just this year had the first graduating set of students in a Bachelor's of Applied Data Science. We have a new Masters of Artificial Intelligence program, a new Masters of Data Science program, and a new Masters of Business Analytics programs. And all of those have programs that are available to be delivered online, as well as in the more traditional on-campus experience. What those programs have also enabled us to do is to think through what are the communities that need education, the communities including industry upskilling of the workforce with new technologies, as well as being able to reach out to smaller communities, students in remote regions who don't have access to a university, and information that we can then share through an online media. And of course, one of the things that COVID has taught us is we're actually much more capable of teaching online than we probably would have realized 2 or 3 years ago. So we do have programs available. I'm not sure, I'd be interested in your feedback on whether the programs we've put in place are actually going to serve the needs that you're seeing out in the community. So I'd certainly be interested in a follow-up conversation on that.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I'll definitely do that. Thanks.
Great.
Our next question is from Margarita Cotti, Manager in Consulting at Deloitte.
Hello, and thank you so much for the inspiring talk. It was very interesting. I have a kind of a follow-up to Ivana's question. I was wondering, how did you find the move from industry to academia? And what is the meta-knowledge you can share here?
So industry and academia are clearly very different, and I didn't grow up in academia. And so one of the things that I've found I've had to learn is really how a university works. And so that's been a journey for me to understand the leadership styles and focus areas and priorities for the university. And during the last 2 years, the university has launched a new strategic plan. It's called Impact 2030, that is really driving a focus around education and excellence in research around these big key priority topic areas. So for me, understanding how does a university work versus how does industry work was the learning journey for me. One of the things I would say, though, for any of us who's considering a career move is to look at the organization you're considering joining in the context of the quality of the people in the organization. And that for me has always been a sort of a decision point, even within industry, as I was looking at moving from one role to another within IBM, is the team of people that I would be joining. Is that a team of people that are leading, that are respectful, that are kind, and that have a focus on really looking at ways that we can do things differently in the future. And so what I found in the university is fantastic people. And that for me was really an indicator of, is this an organization that one could move to and feel like one could have an impact? And so for me, that's certainly been true. One of the biggest differences, though, I think, is the timescale to impact. Industry moves much, much faster. Universities are on a different timescale. They're on a different clock. They're on a clock of educating and graduating students. They're on a clock of building a research agenda around educating and promoting students. So it's on a different style of financial year calendar from industry. And as we think about ways of engaging between university and industry, it causes some impedance mismatch. Industry partners will come along with a problem and want really an opportunity to build and design a solution within maybe a 6-month time period. Well, a PhD student takes 3.5 to 4 years or more to graduate. And so how do we build the right programmatic linkages between the value that a university can provide to industry without it being a view that says, and please wait till my students graduated? So some of those timescale alignments are some of the things that we're looking at from an institute perspective of how do we drive more value in those industry partnerships for the future.
Very, very useful. Thank you so much.
Our next question is from Elnaz Hosseini, an undergrad student at University of Toronto in art.
No, I'm not from University of Toronto.
Oh, sorry, that was the info we had.
I do have, I did study arts, but in a different college. I have one question. So this is a topic that I'm fascinated about. Like, it's something that I want to study in future, but it's just, that's why I'm like trying to do my research and trying to gain as much as knowledge as I can before I start my journey. But like my background is from art, and I'm happy that I came here today because I never know where I can connect myself to this topic. And now I realize, oh yeah, I love philosophy, and I always thought like it would be in that topic. But as a female, I have this question where like something like me as a female, I have this question, do you feel like understanding that you're creating emotions for something in future that doesn't have an emotion? Like if you go into topic, when it comes to philosophy, you're going into the art stuff, the feeling stuff, the connection between human and the science behind AI, right? How does that connect? Because for me, there's a gap there. I feel like there's this shame or this feeling in my guts that I'm not doing something right. And that shouldn't be the case, right? Because if I want to start this, I have to get into this with this ease, with this feeling of like this shouldn't be the feeling inside me, right? I don't know. That's my question.
So first of all, I would encourage you that, yes, we need people like you in the conversation and in the discussion. As you go back to that Dartmouth conference picture with 10 men, that you know, it really makes you think about, could we build the solutions that we need for the future if the developers look like that group from the Dartmouth conference? It's very clear that with more than half the population of the world are women, and so those women are experiencing what we're developing and putting out into the marketplace. And so we need people like you involved in those design discussions, those philosophical discussions, those ethical discussions, because of that view that says you're going to look at things from a different lens, a different viewpoint, and that diversity in experience is going to be incredibly important. And that's why, particularly at Monash, right, we're trying to integrate across the humanities as well as the STEM disciplines, so that even though we have women in STEM, we're not just thinking about it through the lens of technology, right? I mean, I grew up as a physicist, right? So I think about things through the lens of technology. I don't think about things as much through the lens of impact of society, unless we have some of those people from the world of humanities that we can pull into the conversation. So absolutely tremendous opportunity, and stay with it.
Great, thanks.
All right, so one last question from Esther Dryberg.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes.
Just a question. One of the areas that I'm interested in is how AI can be applied to mental health, particularly in the area of assisting counselors in being able to kind of scale their capability across the, I guess, the lack of capacity in the system. Have you seen any kind of growth in that area? Or any kind of best of class uses of AI in mental health?
It's a very active field. So we've got a number of different programs around, broadly speaking, brain health, and we've got one interesting project that's going on within the Faculty of Medicine that we've been involved in is a program around it's mental health, but in the context of teenagers and eating disorders, and they've built a chatbot to help dietary clinicians and the various different clinics around eating disorders to be able to launch a new chatbot kit that is enabling a different style of interaction between, in essence, patient and physician. We've got some evidence of different styles of engagement around mental health. We've actually run a lot of surveys over the last 2 years, really trying to understand also the mental health impacts of the pandemic on our student body, on our staff and professional populations across the universities. So a lot of studies and analysis. I think the question becomes, are there good examples of enablement tools or assistive tools to help in the treatment or in the identification? But it's a very active space at the moment, Esther, and I think it's only accelerated as a result of all of the concerns about mental health during the pandemic, and also mental health on your employees. If you're running a business, understanding how do you support your employees with the business is a big focus around wellness and how can we enable employers to be productive. I don't think I can point to best-in-class solutions of what I think is really going great, but there are very clearly AI experiments going on to look at how do we provide, in essence, support solutions, how do we provide analysis and detection solutions, but ultimately, how do we actually enable better health and wellness for the community by understanding mental health in a fundamentally different way?
Yeah, and I can imagine the whole metaverse area as well. As we grow into that, there's got to be lots of applications there as well around being able to provide support, being able to see moods on people's faces and that sort of thing in the mental health space.
Yes, and of course, as you might imagine, lots of questions around ethics and data privacy as well. And so again, how do you enable people to opt in to be able to share their information with you without imposing guidelines that perhaps get into a different style of challenge with respect to employment law, if an employer is trying to figure out how do I support my workforce. So again, it's a very rich field from a research perspective, but also has some interesting societal questions and challenges ahead of it as well.
And our final question to you, Joanna, is, and I think you already answered it, but maybe if you just had some encapsulating words of wisdom, what advice would you give to women in the field of AI?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think one of the questions I got asked recently is what is AI? And I'd encourage all of you to have your, whether it's the 30-second elevator pitch or lift for those of you in Australia or the UK, but your 30-second elevator pitch, your 2-minute elevator pitch, or even your 5-minute, this is what I'm working on summary. But it's a really interesting and necessary skill set to be able to say, I'm Joanna, I'm working on, and this is important because, or I'm working on AI and this is what I'm doing and this is what AI means to me. Being able to, in whatever situation you're in, the Christmas party, the party on the beach, the conversation with your colleagues at work, to be able to very clearly and succinctly describe what you're working on, why it's important to you, and why it's going to make a difference. Whatever you're working on, but particularly in the context of AI, because AI is it's either so big or so narrow, depending on who you chat with. Some people say, well, AI, that's not really AI. AI is just a subset of data science, or data science, well, it's not really data science, it's really data analytics. Everyone will have an opinion. And so I think it's, I'd really encourage each one of you to have your speaker bullet points of how you describe what AI means for you in the context of the projects that you're working on, and to be able to defend it. Because we all know that we like a debate, but being able to summarize it very clearly. And if you happen to get into the elevator with the executive and you've never met the executive before, and they turn to you and say, hello, Joanna, what are you working on? Or, who are you and what are you working on? Being able to have those speaker bullets, I think that's really, really important. And the other thing I would say is be confident, be bold, right? We're in this conversation. Back to my earlier charts, right? We do have a diversity challenge in the population of developers across AI. We need more of us in those conversations. And so be confident that there's an opportunity ahead for you. You may not be able to see it immediately, but have enough trust in your own capability and the desire to make a difference, and then go after it and be as bold as you can. And if you're feeling uncomfortable and shy, find colleagues around you that can help support you and build the confidence until you feel you can really get up there on the big stage and tell your story.
Thank you so much, Joanna, for an extremely engaging presentation and an inspiring Q&A. And thank you to everyone in the audience for joining us today. We'd appreciate it if you could take a minute to share your thoughts on today's session through the survey link that's posted in the chat. We also invite you to join us in the new year for a talk by Cynthia Rudin, the Earl D. McLean Junior Professor of Computer Science, Electrical and Computer Engineering, Statistical Science, Mathematics, and Biostatistics and Bioinformatics at Duke University for a talk titled, Do Simpler Machine Learning Models Exist, and How Can We Find Them? Details for this next session can be found by visiting the Schwartz Reisman Institute's website, Twitter, and the mailing list, all of which are linked in the Zoom chat. We look forward to seeing you all on January 17th at 9 a.m. EST. Thank you all.
Thank you very much.